Hello everyone. Today I am going to be doing a tag video. This is the first one of these that I have ever done, but I was tagged in a couple of videos last week, one of which I have to take some time to think about the answers, but the other of which is just questions about your early reading life. So I felt like those are a little bit easier to answer kind of by the seat of your pants. So I was tagged by Jolien Reads, and I will link her channel below with the tag that she did. And this tag is called the Hindsight is 2020 tag. And as I said before, it's all about your early reading life, what established your reading tastes, what kind of an early reader were you? And it seemed like a lot of fun, so I am going to give it a go and answer the questions that she posed. So the first question is, what were you like as an early reader? And I think the answer to that question is kind of the same answer as right now. I was a voracious reader as a young kid. I have always loved reading. It has always been the thing that I liked to do the most. It's hard. I wouldn't describe myself as shy, but I am reserved in terms of spending time with other people. So I really like to spend time with my friends. I am very close with the friends that I have, but it takes a long time for me to warm up to people and to feel comfortable in front of people. And I think even though I was very talkative as a child, I was still a little bit reserved around strangers and around new people. So I think that is one of the reasons why I always really liked to read, because it was a solitary activity and I was a solitary child and I am now a solitary adult. So it is a pastime that has always held a lot of appeal for that reason. When I was young, I read anything that I could. My childhood books, my parents kept them all, and I am lucky enough to have them now for my children. And ones that were a big hit with me, I really loved reading the Berenstain Bear books when I was really young. The Three Billy Goats Gruff was a big favorite for me. Harold and the Purple Crayon, which I've talked about on the channel before. And then from there, like graduating from children's books, I liked, in terms of early readers, I enjoyed reading this series called The Pony Pals, which was about three friends who all had ponies and they would go on adventures and solve mysteries together. And it was my favorite kind of childhood reading series in that way. And what would happen is I grew up in a really isolated town. So in order to get even to the closest grocery store, you had to drive for an hour. And to get to the nearest hospital or shopping mall or anything like that, it was 2 hours. So we would go out of town on the weekends or every second weekend, and my parents would pick up one of these kind of early reader chapter books and I would read it on the way home. And this is a fact that blows my mind right now, because I get so carsick, I can't even sit on a swing and swing without getting dizzy and feel like I need to throw up. So it blows my mind that as a young kid, I was reading in the backseat of a car, but maybe that's what did me in. I don't know. Next question is, what book or book series got you interested or excited to read as a kid? And I talked a little bit about that early reader series, The Pony Pals. But the first, let's say, quote unquote, adult books that I can remember reading that got me really excited were Jack London's books. So my dad had this bind up, and I actually have it on my shelves upstairs right now, of a bunch of Jack London's stories. And within that, there was The Call of the Wild and White Fang. So those are the two kind of what I looked at as a child as adult stories that I read before any others, and they completely gripped me. I can still remember as I don't even know how old I was, like a 6-year-old or whatever, having dreams about being on a dog sled and having Buck from The Call of the Wild or the wolf from White Fang pulling me through the mountains where I lived. And as I said, it's very isolated. Actually, in the wintertime when it snows in my hometown, the road can become completely closed off and no one can get in or out of the town, which is scary if you have a medical condition or if you are pregnant and things happen outside of your control. But I remember the place where I grew up was the perfect isolated location to really get lost in those adventure stories, and I love them. They completely helped grow my love of fantasy. They cemented my love for animal companions or fantasy novels about animals, and they're the first what I used to refer to as like real chapter books that I read as a young kid, and I have such fond memories of them. Question number 3 is there a person, either real or fictional, that inspired your love of reading? And this one is super easy. I feel like I talk about this all the time, and it is definitely my dad. Both my parents were readers, so my mom loves reading romance. She read Harlequin romances, she read contemporary women's fiction, any kind of romance, and any kind of true crime. So if you think like the stereotype of a suburban housewife and the interests that woman would have, that is 100% my mom, and it is fantastic. She loves those kinds of stories, she loves those kinds of movies, she loves decorating and getting things ready for holidays, and it made for a very warm and cozy household when I was a child. But that was not A, my personality, or B, the kind of things that I like to read. So my reading inspiration was definitely drawn from my dad, who was 100% a fantasy reader. His shelves were full of fantasy books, and he was really good at picking ones that suited particular age ranges. I used to see him reading things and I would get really excited to be able to read it, and really mad if he felt like it was not appropriate for me yet. But luckily he always had something different that he could pass over that could kind of tide me over until I got to the book that I really wanted. And yeah, he was reading all the time. Question number 4 is, when did you begin to identify as a reader? And I think for me, this started to happen kind of in late primary school. So in my early life, because both my parents read books, because I didn't spend a ton of time with other kids outside of like being outdoors. So we spent a lot of time outside. My town was really small, it's in the woods. And we were outside basically all the time. So if I wasn't reading, if I was spending time with friends, then it was outdoors. And so to me, life was the same for everybody. You went outside and you played, and then you came inside and you read books. And that was just my automatic assumption for much of my early life. And it didn't really occur to me that people did things differently until we started to age up in primary school and get involved in reading programs. So in Canada, at least in the province that I lived in, they had an early scholastic program called Accelerated Reader. So you would select a book out of your school's library, you would read it, you would get points based on how many books you read, and then you could do quizzes about the books, and you would get points based on the level of difficulty of the quizzes and of the books. And this was really appealing to someone who loved to read, but also someone who was really competitive and very scholastically driven. So it was, I look back and I'm like, maybe that wasn't a great setup for people who struggled in school and who found those kind of competitive atmospheres to be really anxiety provoking. But for me, it was the best. I was super into it. And I think when I started to pull books to read for that, I started to realize that the things that I was reading and the things that other people in my class were reading were different. And I began to be asked for things and be asked information by teachers that was pulled directly from what I was reading. And one particularly vivid memory that I have is from grade 3, because I remember my school years in terms of teacher, as I'm sure so many of us do. So I remember my particular teacher, and she was my grade 3 teacher, asking me where rabbits lived. And she said, "I know that you know this answer, Sarah, because I saw that you were reading Watership Down, and that's about rabbits." And it was at that moment that I discovered, or I guess I came to the realization that these books that I was reading, they weren't only good for entertainment, and they weren't only something to do for fun. They were something that they were teaching me something about the world. And it also made me realize that fantasy books were just as good to teach you about the world as any other type of book. There are things to learn from anything that we read. And it was in that moment where I felt so proud and so happy to know the answer to a question because of something that I had read that I began to think of myself as a reader. So that's probably where that started, and it has continued throughout the rest of my life. The fifth and final question is, how did being a reader shape your worldview? So I actually did a video about this and about some fantasy books that shaped my worldview and shaped the kind of person that I became. But I do think that, there are some obvious benefits to being a reader, and this is why we promote reading to young children. We promote parents reading to their kids reading independently, and it's because books and literature in total, it's because books and literature open up your mind and expand your worldview. You get to experience life from a perspective that was otherwise closed to you. I am very aware of all of the privileges that I have been granted in my life in terms of where I was born, in terms of the environment that I had growing up. My parents did not have a lot of money, but I grew up in a 2-parent household. I had parents who quite obviously cared for me, who believed in me, who told me that I was valuable, that I had worth, and that allowed me to go on and accomplish the things that I did later in life. And without reading and without that window into the lives of other people, I think that I would have significantly less empathy, or I would have had significantly less empathy for people who were in a different position from me. Outside of just the general face value teaching that comes from books, I think that so much of our social and emotional skills come from our ability to empathize with people whose situations differ greatly from ours. And reading for me was definitely the first step in discovering some of that world. When you grow up in a very isolated community, when the people you go to school with look exactly like you, act exactly like you, it can be difficult to broaden your worldview, and it can be difficult to broaden your horizons. And we see the effects of that reverberate in our larger communities, in the politics of the world at large. And I think that reading and exploring the stories of people whose lives differ greatly from your own is one of the best things that you can do for yourself. It's one of the best things you can do as a parent, is to provide your child with an opportunity to learn about those things. And I think that books have definitely helped shape me in that way. I mean, there are lots of other less complex answers probably. I mean, I love fantasy. It has shaped the decisions that I have made throughout my life. Falling in love with Tolkien made me fall in love with languages, which led me to pursue my initial degree, which put me on a path that brought me to medical school and the job that I'm in now. So in very large and small ways, books have had a huge impact on my life. They have definitely been the foundation of the type of person that I have become, and I am so, so grateful that I grew up in a house where reading books was commonplace and something to be admired. That is the end of this pretty short tag. I would love to tag people in it, but I don't really have anybody to do that with. So if you ended up watching this and you have not done it, then by all means, I would love to hear any and all answers to this. And I hope that everybody has a great rest of their day, and I will see you again soon. Bye.